You're about to hear an original HFY sci-fi tale titled The War of Silent Stars, Part 10, a girl alone surviving in the forest journey to the floating islands in the sky. Find a quiet spot, put on your headphones, and let the stars fall silent. If you enjoy cinematic sci-fi narrations, consider subscribing for more. Now we begin. The forest held its breath. No wind, no birds, no insect hum. Only the small sound of a human child, moving through ferns with careful, quiet steps, a knife clutched in one hand and a coil of braided copper wire in the other. Her name was Ree. She was 12 years old. She had black hair tied with a strip of cloth torn from her mother's sleeve and a gaze like winter water, still on the surface, deep beneath. For a long time the sky had made no sound. The war above had grown silent. The fleets did not scream across the firmament anymore, not here, not over the forest that had swallowed the city and grown thick around the old mountain. They called it the War of Silent Stars because the machines learned to fight without sound, vacuum eating thunder, algorithms cutting the noise away. But on the ground, silence meant something else. It meant grief, hunger, the careful footsteps of a child who had lost everything and refused to stop. Ree moved through the green light. Pale fungus glowed under fallen logs. The trees were fat and older than the war. Their bark drank sunlight and the little radiation the ships had shed, and the new growth was darker, larger, stranger. She didn't mind. The forest hid her. The forest fed her. She knew the trail by heart. 3 steps past the thorn bush. A shallow curve right, where a ruined drone lay with its belly open, vines threaded through its ribs of carbon lattice. A pool of green water that smelled faintly of iron. And beyond it, the broken beacon, a metal spire snapped near the top, its dish warped, its mast a jagged finger aimed at a quiet sky. Ree knelt, pressed her ear to the spire and listened. Nothing. She slid the copper wire under the base where moss hid the maintenance latch. A little twist, a little spark. She winced, but she didn't let go. The world smelled like wet earth and ozone, a chirp, a blink of green. "Come on," she whispered, because she had learned that sometimes machines like to be asked. "Please." Another blink, slow, then faster. Ree smiled. She wiped her hands on her shirt, adjusted the small solar panel she had scavenged, and watched the power trickle in. She had spent months coming back to this point. Months of learning the spire's moods, its hunger, the way the night dew hardened the rheostats and loosened them again. She had woken to dreams of voices in the metal. She had scratched diagrams into bark. She had bled on its bolts. The broken beacon had become her prayer and her plan. Because the forest may have fed her, but the forest was not the end. She looked up. The sky was a deep washed blue. The clouds were tattered. Above them hung the islands. The first time she saw them, she thought she'd imagined it. Lights like cities, stone like mountains. Islands, yes, but not in the sea. They floated in the open sky, too far to see the edges clearly, too close to pretend they weren't real. They drifted slowly like whales. And sometimes at night she saw them pulse with colors, and the trees thrummed in time as if they had roots not in soil but in the airs above. People told stories about those islands once. Before the silent war, when the world still had the old sky nets and weather rails. Ree's mother had laughed, twisting Ree's hair into a knot and kissing her forehead. "Cloud cities," she'd said, "made by the first terraformers, or maybe by the ones who came before us. People say their engines are so perfect they still burn even now. People say life grows there untouched by the ground's wars. Fruit the size of your head, water that tastes like rain." Ree had asked, "Do people live there?" Her mother had paused. "They were not made for us." "Then who are they for?" "For the ones who were here first," her mother had said softly, "or the ones who will be last." Ree's mother was gone now, a silhouette in smoke and then nothing at all. The memory of her voice lived in Ree like a coal that refused to die. The islands drifted. The war went silent. The ground struggled. Ree learned to snare rabbits with wire and set traps for drones with magnetized nails. She learned how to drink water from leaves and how to make a fish hook from a stripped screw. She learned the map of the forest with her cousin Mika, whose laugh was too loud until it wasn't anymore. Mika had gotten a cough and then fever, and then she had gone very still with her eyes open and empty, and Ree had sat by her for a day and a night because she couldn't make herself move. After that, something inside her had sharpened. The beacon blinked again. Ree adjusted the copper wire and waited. She smelled the old city sometimes when the wind came from the east and carried ghosts, burnt plastic, stone dust. A street she had walked once to buy fruit with her mother, its tiles warm, its vendors smiling, her small hand held in a larger one. "Come on," she whispered again, touching the spire, and then the beacon sang. It wasn't a loud song, it wasn't a song at all. It was a pulse down the length of the metal, a hum in her bones. Her hand vibrated, her teeth buzzed. The hair on her arm stood up, and the forest seemed to draw breath for the first time in months. She scrambled to her pack, pulled out the cracked handheld she had charged all morning, and clipped it to the spire. The handheld had once belonged to a medtech. It had blood on its corners that had never quite washed away. Ree didn't care. She had soldered a new port onto its edge and told it that if it listened, she would feed it power and keep it warm. It had rewarded her by pretending to be a receiver again. On the screen, a line of static crawled, then dots, then faintly a voice. "Pete, to any ground survivors. Sky Cities en route to Lagrange Corridor. We are evacuating what remains. Lock beacons to automatic. If you are breathing, hold on." Ree's heart punched her ribs. She pressed the speaker close to her ear. "Say again," she whispered, though she knew they couldn't hear. "Say it again." The voice was broken by long gaps, as if the sky had holes in it. The words kept falling through. "Not safe to transmit long forms. Enemy satellites harvested from silent bands. But we see you. We see your little lights. Hold on, we are coming. We will not leave you on a burning world." Ree's mouth opened and a sound came out of her that she had not made since her mother had died. She didn't know if it was a laugh or a sob. Both were new to her now. "Coming," she said, almost afraid to feel the shape of the word. "Coming where?" A pause, then the two words that would change everything. "Floating islands." She closed her eyes. She saw the islands in her mind, not as glowing myths but as harbors. Their engines had hummed while the war taught itself to be quiet. They had drifted above the forest while children like her learned to steal food from traps and heat water over slow coals. Now, the old cities in the sky would come low. They would find the quick lights of old beacons someone like Ree had coaxed awake. They would lower ladders or beams or miracles. They would rescue. They would carry survivors up into the long blue away from the ground's grief. She looked at her hands. She had calluses like rope. She had bruises fading on her shins. She had a throat that had learned to be quiet and a mind that had learned to hold numbers and paths in the same place. She could do this. She could get to the islands when they came closest. She could go from the forest to the sky if she could survive long enough. The hum faded. The spire went dull. The handheld screen went blank with a faint whining sigh. Ree unclipped the handheld and tucked it into her shirt, beneath the bandage cloth where her mother's sleeve tied back her hair. The cloth felt like blessing. She stood. The forest watched. Far away, like thunder under stone, something moved. She knew that sound. It was not weather. It was metal on air. It was an air skimmer cutting low, its hull grabbing gusts and throwing them back. That meant eyes. That meant sensors shaped to find heat and motion and the shape of a little human body against the green. That meant the ones who hunted survivors for reasons nobody explained. Scavenger cults, enemy drones grown feral, earthborn pirates with quiet engines and loud knives. The war had bled down into the underbrush and it liked to feed. Ree killed the beacon. She gathered her wire. She wiped fingerprints from the base with damp moss. Then she ran. Her feet knew the knots in the roots. Her hands found trunks without looking. She cut left along a ridge and dropped into a hollow where black stones seethed with ants. She rolled under a fallen log and lay on her back, breathing through her nose, counting to 20 and back again. The skimmer passed above the canopy with a pulse that made the leaves lean. Its belly was dark. Its logo had been stripped. Ree saw only a swatch of gray and a circle of glass underneath where a gun could sit. She had a gift, and she had learned it by losing everything. She could make herself small. Small in sound, small in motion, small in the way that the world looked at her and slid past. She cupped the handheld in both hands and didn't look at it because she knew that if she clutched it like a charm, the skimmer would see her wanting and come down to take her wanting away. It moved on. The forest breathed out. Ree did not. When her heart slowed, she slid out and listened. Her breath clouded in the cooler pocket. The smell of crushed fern was bitter. The day had stretched. She had a plan, and plans kept new grief away. The islands did not pass overhead every day. Their orbit was lazy, tugged by winds and whatever engines still burned in their hearts. But sometimes in late afternoon, when the light angled and made the edges of leaves glow white, one or two of the islands drifted low enough to touch the bottoms of the clouds, and for a few minutes she could see waterfall threads spilling from their edges, gleaming like silk. Those were the openings. The rescue voice had said en route to Lagrange Corridor. That meant the islands were gathering, moving toward the space road that ran between the world and the moon like an invisible river. That meant they would pass closer. That meant they would have to feed. They would drink from thunderheads or from the mountain lakes. They would open doors. They would lower something. Ree needed a place where the line between ground and sky was thinner. She needed the ridge above the old dam. That meant crossing the hollow where the river braided itself through reeds, and the hollow meant the ruins of Aggie Town, and Aggie Town meant bones. Once there had been a settlement there. 6 dome houses made of inflatable frames and woven ceramic, children climbing on roofs. 3 pen fences with goats that had not been goats exactly, but Earth's best guess at the new grass. A little store with a blue awning where Ree had gotten sweet brewed tea the day she had walked with her mother to take vaccines to a school. Aggie had been the bully who kept the goats together and had a laugh like spilling grain. Then the skimmers had come and set fire to the oxygen stacks and cut Aggie down when she tried to put them out, and the settlement had turned into a scar in the reeds. Ree had only come here once since. She had tripped over a small skull and gone numb inside and walked home very slowly and slept for 2 days without moving much at all. She told herself, "You are going to the ridge. You are going to the islands. You are the one who lives. Walk." She walked. The hollow was low and wet. Midges made fragile halos out of air. The reeds cut her ankles. She kept her steps on stones and old tiles where the store had been, avoiding the places where water lay still and breathed rot. She stepped into someone's old garden and found a seed bin, its lid tilted, its handles cracked. She hesitated, then pried it open. Inside were beans, brown, dry, a little mold at the edges. She almost cried. Food was food, beans were weeks. Weeks were breath between now and the sky. She scooped the beans into her pack. The seed bin moved and knocked something over. A shape slid and clinked. She stared. It was a mirror, cracked. The handle was made of burned plastic. She picked it up. Her face looked back at her in slices, dark eyes, darker shadows under them, lips cracked but firm. A new little scar along her left cheek where the barbed wire had caught her 2 weeks ago. A child, yes. But the bones that held the child's eyes were getting strong. She put the mirror down. She took one bean and slid it into the pocket of her shirt where it would bump her heart as she walked. A little promise. She wasn't alone in the hollow. On the far edge where the reeds gave up and dry ground began, a shape stood between 2 ragged trees. It leaned against one trunk and looked at her with something like curiosity, something like hunger. It was not human. If you tried to draw a human and gave up halfway, you might end up with something like it. Long limbs. Skin that looked like it had been woven from blue smoke and stitched with silver thread. A face that was almost a face but didn't decide completely. It wore a scarf, and Ree could tell it was a scarf, even if it had been made from fibers she didn't have a name for. A machine sat on its chest like a beetle with glass wings, and that machine hummed almost too quietly to hear. Ree's body remembered how to be stone. She froze halfway through a step, one hand still in the seed bin. The not-human tilted its head. It raised one long finger and put it to the place where a mouth might be, and the gesture was so familiar Ree almost laughed despite the ice in her neck. "SHH," it said without saying it. Ree slowly took her hand from the bin. She let the lid fall, soft. She did not run. Running makes noise. Running wakes hunger. The thing pushed away from the tree and moved along the edge of the hollow, not quite touching the grass. It stopped when it stood across from her. It smelled like lightning. Ree had seen aliens. Not many. Not this close. But years ago, before the war learned to whisper, in the city when sirens still worked and buses still slid along lines drawn by magnets under the streets, her mother had gone to a clinic to teach, and an alien had waited in the hallway with a hurt child. He'd had a face like carved wood and fingers like steel, and his eyes had looked like someone else's sky. He had nodded at Ree and given her a candy that tasted like salt, and his child had coughed a cough that sounded like stones hitting water. Ree had smiled and not been afraid. This one was different. This one had a wound she couldn't see. It carried the wound like a weight in its shoulders. It held out its hand. The hand had too many joints. On the palm, a small square glowed and flickered. Words crawled across it, letters she could read. "Do you speak?" Ree nodded. It brightened. The words shifted again. "Do you have a name?" She could smell the war on it. The machine on its chest wasn't just a machine, it was a leash. The forest silence made sense in the shape of that thing's patient gaze. The silence had learned to wear a body. "Ree," she said softly. It copied the sound, tasting it. "Rea." Her mouth twitched. Close. It pointed up. In the white rind of sky, one of the floating islands paused behind a cloud. Then slowly it drifted free. The afternoon light caught a rim of stone so worn it looked like bone. Water fell in a fine mist, curling in wind. The alien wrote, "You want to go there." Ree nodded again. It wrote, "Please, help me, I will help you." Her hair prickled. She looked at the machine on its chest. "What is that?" It wrote, "Collar, it hears silence." Ree understood and did not understand. "Take it off." The alien's almost face shifted. Not a smile, a space where a smile might go. It wrote, "If I take it off, it screams. The others will come. And when they come, they take the collar and put it on someone younger. I am old enough to bear it. I carry it until I break. That is the math they prefer." Ree watched its fingers. The words were careful, the way her mother's had been when explaining why a fever rises when it rises. The alien's hand shook. It wrote, "I followed the islands. I cannot reach them. I do not have breath enough." It held out its hand. Ree thought of the voice in her handheld speaker saying, "We are coming." She thought of ladders, of beams, of miracles. She thought of this creature's fingers drawing words her brain could turn into sound. She took its hand. It was lukewarm and too smooth. The machine on its chest hummed louder for a moment, then softened. The alien shuddered. Ree smelled metal and something like flowers crushed to pulp. It wrote, "Thank you, I am Mill. You are Ree. I do not like the hollow. Please come." Not a command. A plea. They moved together along the edge of the reeds, following a line of trees that rose on a higher ground. Ree knew this path. It would take them up to the ridge if they kept the mountain on their left and didn't step into the pits where the mining bots had once burrowed. From the ridge, they would see the old dam far below. The dam had cracked but not broken. The water clawed at its base, trying to remember how to be river. Mill walked like someone who had learned to move upright recently. Ree matched its pace. She found a rhythm in the sound of the machine's breath and the soft clatter of its glass wings. They reached the slope and climbed. Branches snatched at Ree's hair. She ducked beneath them without thinking. She knew how to avoid losing a strand. Hair caught, hair left, hair found. That was how they tracked sometimes. "Will the collar tell them about me?" she asked the air. The forest ate her words. Mill wrote, "It tells them when I run. It tells them when I am free. It tells them when I have joy. It is less sensitive to grief. Ree looked at it sharply. So you try to be sad. Mill's fingers paused. Then, sometimes we can lie to our machines. She held that in her mouth like a pepper and felt it burn. The ridge was bare at the top. Someone had cut trees here once to build something that never got built. White stones marked a circle where a fire had been. Ree didn't step inside it. She had a rule: never step into other people's circles. From the ridge, the forest spread like a green ocean. The broken city's bones poked out of it, pyramids of concrete with vines crawling down their flanks. The dam lay at the bottom of the valley like a scar, with water gleaming blue on one side and black on the other, and above it, above everything, the islands rolled. The closest was massive. It ate half the sky. Its underside was a cathedral of roots and pipes and tangles of old metal. Lights flickered like a city seen through rain. On one edge, a waterfall exploded into spray that burned ice-white in the sun. The spray didn't fall all the way down. It turned into cloud and drifted away, carrying a smell like clean stone. As they watched, a beam speared down. Not light, something like light. A field, invisible except for the dust it caught. It stabbed the edge of the dam like a finger and stuck, and the bursting water calmed as if it had remembered an old lullaby. Ree was crying. She didn't know when she had begun. Her face was wet and the wind pressed cold hands against it. She clenched her jaw. Mill had fallen to its knees. Its machine hummed a warning. The alien's long fingers curled around dry grass and broke blades with a soft hiss. Its body shook. "Hey," Ree said. She touched its shoulder. "Hey." It wrote with a hand that trembled. "I left my people at the foot of a black tower. I told them I would find a way. Many have died. More will die if I do not climb, but I do not know how to climb the sky." Ree swallowed. She dug into her pack and took out the coil of copper wire. She had her knife. She had a glass jar with a lid that sealed. She had her handheld with its cracked screen and stubborn sole. She had a handful of magnetized nails she wore like a necklace when she slept. She had a scrap of solar film that had been a prayer flag on a roof once. She had beans now. She laid them out between them like offerings. "We build," she said. Mill's almost face softened. It wrote, "We build." They built. Not the way the old engineers had built, with heavy machines and plans that had to be followed like rules. They built like animals build nests, like rivers build curves. Re-wrapped copper wire into loops and hung them on dead branches, made ladders for invisible fields. Mill drew diagrams in the dirt with a delicate twig and then smudged them out and drew finer lines. Reclimbed a wind-twisted tree and lashed her solar film high, turned just so to catch the waning sun. Mill unstitched the scarf, and inside were folded thin squares like leaves, each etched with sharp, tiny paths. Mill arranged those leaves into a web and touched them with 2 fingers, and the web hummed. Ree took the jar and filled it with water from the ridge's seam rock and a pinch of ground iron and shook it until her arms hurt, then set it near the web and watched the surface change, flattening in a way water doesn't. They made a thing with no good name, a skirt for wind, a trap for sky, an argument phrased in copper and hope about where gravity should go for a moment. The island's beam held steady, drinking. Smaller lights crawled along its belly. The waterfall thickened, the beam flickered, the jar's water rippled without wind. Ree's handheld buzzed. She flinched and grabbed it. On the screen, a single word pulsed, made of letters that shook closer. She looked up. She looked at Mill. "It sees us." Mill touched the web. The collar hummed louder. "Closer," Ree said. "We have to be closer." On the ridge's far side, a cliff dropped into a bowl of old trees and boulders. In the cliff's face, an iron ladder was bolted, no rungs missing. It climbed to a little platform that jutted just far enough out to see beyond the curve of the valley. Ree had never climbed it. She had looked at it 100 times and told herself that if she did, she would be seen. Today, being seen might mean survival. She tested the first rung. It held. "Stay," she asked Mill. Mill wrote, "I will hold the shape. You bring the sky down." Ree climbed. Halfway up, the ladder shook. A low roar rose from the valley as the beam brightened and her bones ached. She had only ever wanted a bed and her mother's voice and a spoon that made soup taste warm. She climbed anyway. Her fingers slipped once. She caught herself on a rung and hung for a heartbeat, gasping. She thought of Mika's open eyes. She climbed. She reached the platform. It was a square of rust and old bird droppings. It rocked when she put her weight on it. Her stomach dropped into her shoes. She crawled to the edge and looked out. The island towered. The beam keened, a song even the forest couldn't swallow. It skated across the dam's white scar, searching for cracks, and when it found one, it settled like a hand. Ree pulled up the web with the copper loops and the scarf leaves and the jar and spread them at the platform's edge, adjusting by feel. She set the jar so its surface reflected the smallest corner of the island's belly. She adjusted the angle of the solar film until the handheld buzzed again, this time with a tone like a question. She answered the question with a nail arranged north-south and a strip of fabric wetted, and then wrung until it held the exact weight of her fear. She pressed her thumb to the jar's lid and thought of her mother's hands on the day Ree had been born, fingers pressing down, lifting, counting. The condensation on the jars inside smeared. The air smelled like rain, the beam twitched, it wavered. For an instant it brushed the jar. The water leaped, Ree's hair lifted, every bone in her body went hollow with lightning. The platform lurched and she rolled and the jar went over the edge and smashed into light. The beam caught it. The beam drank it the way a thirsty person drinks puddle water and doesn't care. A second, smaller beam stabbed from the island's edge and kissed the cliff under the platform. Stone sizzled. The solar film flapped once and stilled, not from wind but from something else, a field finding itself. Ree held her breath. She looked at the handheld. Its screen was white with words she couldn't read. Then the words stilled. Hold. She looked up. Ladders did not fall from the island. There were no ropes. The old stories were wrong. Something like a shimmer dropped from the island's side and touched the edge of the platform. The air smelled like ice and crushed mint. The shimmer had no shape, and then it had many shapes, each almost a ladder. Ree reached into it with one hand. Her fingers went cold and then warm. The shimmer held her like a promised thing. Ree, Mill's voice was not sound. It was in her bones. It said, "They see you, they do not see me, bring us both." She turned and looked down. At the base of the 6 shapes flowed out of the trees, not human, not alien in any way a picture book would draw. They were machines that had learned to be muscle, metal that had forgotten it was made of laws and decided to be hunger instead. Their backs flexed. Their heads were all sensor and no face. On each chest a collar like Mill's blinked red. The machines smelled silence. They looked up. The shimmer tightened around her hand. Ree made a decision that would become a story. She took the coil of copper wire and the magnetized nails and the strip of cloth, and she threw them down the ladder shaft in a bright arc. The nails sang. The wire snaked. The cloth fluttered like a small bird. The machines' heads jerked. Their collars flashed. They lunged for the distraction. Ree lay flat on the platform and reached her other hand into the shimmer. It held her elbows. She leaned out over the edge of air. "Mill," she whispered. "Jump." The alien looked up at her from the ridge with its long fingers pressed to its chest. The collar hummed loud enough to make the grass ripple. The words wrote themselves on the air. "If I jump, the collar wakes the makers of collars. They will come." Ree bit her lip until iron hit her tongue. The floating island filled her sky. Its beam shifted. A third beam stabbed down a kilometer away and lifted something that looked like a tree and a house and a fallen water tower all welded together. And the something rose and vanished into the island's belly. The island was not waiting for Ree. The island had a job and it was doing it. The island would not weep for a child on a platform and an alien with a machine on its chest. She knew that truth. She did not care about it. She reached into her shirt and took out the beam. She held it up. "Mill," she said, "we climb by being heavier together than alone." Mill tilted its head, as if trying to let the words run through a new set of paths and find a shape that fit. The collar's hum climbed. The machines at the base of the cliff found the nails and the wire and slashed at them, their collars flashing faster. One cut the ladder's lowest rung with a swipe, and the iron squealed. Mill gathered its scarf. It pressed its hands to its chest and the collar. It closed its almost eyes. When it opened them, they were full of a kind of light Ree recognized. Not a beam. A decision. The alien ran. It leaped into the shimmer. Ree grabbed its wrists. The shimmer took both of them. They rose. The platform swung back, abandoned. A machine leaped and missed and fell, its collar screaming a silent frequency that made Ree's vision smear. Another fired a bolt of something like dark, and the dark hit the place where the platform had been and ate metal, which made a noise like old boots in the rain. Ree held on. Her shoulders burned. Mill's weight dragged at her. The shimmer did not care about their fear. It treated their bodies like numbers, two masses, one vector, a sum. Below, the forest moved. Something stepped out of the trees the size of a house. It had tusks like old roots and eyes like moons. It put one foot on a machine and turned it into broken clockwork. It roared without sound, its throat worked. The world refused to let it be heard. It was an animal whose ancestors had learned to beat silence by building a louder quiet inside themselves, a resonance. It breathed and the machines trembled. It looked up at the shimmer and did not understand it, and that was good. Ree did not look down again. She looked up because up was a promise. The underside of the island met them. The shimmer softened like fat in a warm pan. It poured them into a pocket of air that smelled like rain-sharpening knives. Ree's ears popped. Her eyes watered. She found herself lying on a platform that did not look like anything ground made. It was not metal, not stone. It was something in between, grown and laid in one motion. Mill lay beside her, its hands still pressed to the collar. They had made it. For a moment, joy drowned everything, and the collar's scream dulled into the way a headache sometimes sits at the edge of your sight and waits. The platform did not hold still. It undulated. It was part of the island, and the island was alive. A person stood above them, not exactly human. Too tall, too thin, bones like bamboo under skin like paper, eyes big and black and wet. Hair woven into a crown of leaves that were not leaves. They wore a dress that changed color in breath. They smiled. Too rescued, they said in a voice like someone learning the old songs from a tape. "One Ree, one Mill, welcome to Ararat." Ree sat up. She swayed. "Are you human?" The tall person cocked their head. "We were made by humans," they said. "Humans live above, all kinds of lives live above. We are their hands, we are the island's throat, we are the island's heart valves, we are the ones who pull and lift and weigh, we are the ones who say welcome." "Where are?" Ree folded. The adrenaline debt came due. She let herself sink to the platform and counted to 12, because 12 was her age and numbers could be soft pillows if you knew how to use them. She didn't sleep. She didn't dare. But her breath slowed enough to let words in. Mill shifted. Its fingers dug at the collar's edge, seeking a seam. The tall person knelt and touched the collar. Their delicate fingers recoiled. "This is not the kind that comes off." "Make it," Ree said. She realized her hands were fists. She realized the tall person had stepped back. They looked at her for a long breath. "We will try," they said finally. "But if we wake the choir the collar speaks to, they will sing for us. And they are not kind singers. We must swallow our pride. We must be clever." Ree knew about swallowing pride. Pride tastes like old bread. It sticks in your throat. "Please," she said. The tall person smiled again, not unkind. "You have both come far. All who come far are asked for one more step. Come." They guided them into the island's belly. Ararat was not made of rooms. It was made of passages that changed shape to hold you. Of trees grown into pipes and pipes grown into trees, of air that moved as if it had ideas. People moved through it, and they were not all the same kind. Ree saw humans with skin like hers and hair like wire and eyes like coals. She saw beings with fur like moss and hands like tongues. She saw machines that had turned their wheels inward and decided feet would be wiser. Children moved with old people, and nobody seemed to have a right to any particular volume of space. The island gave you as much of itself as you needed in that breath. They led Ree and Mill to a place that was not a room but didn't know how else to be. It had walls. It had a pool. It had benches that grew tired of being benches and turned into beds. The tall person, later Ree learned they were called Kelu because they had chosen a name that felt like wind in a pipe, touched a panel and the air in the room grew sharp, bright, humming. Isolation, Kelu said and smiled in apology. Your collar can sing. Here the song becomes only air. Mill lay back. The machine on its chest ticked like a living clock. Its face was very still. Ree knew that stillness. She had put it on like a coat. A woman came in. She had the shoulders of someone who had carried too much for too long and not broken under it. She was human. She had skin like warm clay and hair cut blunt at the jaw. She wore a jacket with too many pockets. Her eyes saw everything in the room fast, and then they softened when they saw Ree and Mill. I'm Dr. Leon, she said. I run triage on this slice of Ararat. You did something very clever to catch the lift. We got about 5 minutes of telemetry that said, small mind, big solve, thank you. Ree felt heat rise in her cheeks. She ducked her head. I threw a jar, she said, because the thing she had done didn't feel like a clever in a story. It felt like something you do when there's a cliff behind you and a machine in front of you, and a voice saying closer in your ear. Dr. Leon's mouth tugged as if it wanted to be a smile and knew it should be careful. We use jars here all the time, she said. Now your friend. She knelt by Mill and extended a hand. Mill's eyes tracked her. The collar hummed low and then high, testing. We can cut it, Leon said. We have lasers that sing. We have hands that hold so gently the air thanks them, but if we cut it, it will broadcast. What will it broadcast, Mill? Mill's fingers flexed. It wrote on the air with light from the collar, location, vitals, names. Names, Leon repeated softly. Yes, they like to name their prey. Worse than that, it will call the choir. The choir? Ree asked. The ones who learn to make silence into a weapon, Leon said. They sing to the vacuum. They sang to us when we tried to lift the coastal cities and all our lines went slack and the people fell back down and we have been learning to hum in ways they do not hear ever since. Ree's chest hurt in a new way. Then what do? We detune, Leon said simply. We detune the machine until it cannot find the key it needs to wake its masters. We turn its voice into wind. She looked at Mill. Do you consent? Mill nodded. The collars hummed jagged. Mill's fingers wrote, please, it is heavy. Kelu laid their palms on the walls. The room deepened. The air turned white, then colorless again. Leon took a tool from her pocket that looked like a bird's beak wrapped in string and touched it to the collar. The beak opened. The string tightened. The collar screamed a screech that had no sound but had teeth anyway. Ree clenched her jaw until her molars sang. Breathe, Leon said softly. They detuned the machine. It took hours. It took a carefulness that was like prayer. Ree fell asleep twice and woke both times to the same hum, lower each time like a storm leaving. Kelu brought broth sweet with something that had never touched earth. Ree drank and her hands shook. Once she looked up and saw, through a small window at the room's top, the world below turning from blue to black to gray again as clouds formed and unformed under the island's belly. Finally, Leon sat back. Her hair clung damp to her cheeks. Her shoulders trembled. She smiled without reservation this time. It won't sing loud anymore, she said. It may grumble if you ask it to stop working, but the choir won't hear it. We made its voice like rain. You can unhook it now. Mill lifted its long fingers to the collar. They found a seam. They pulled. The collar came away. Ree made a sound like a bird leaving a trap. Mill held the collar in both hands and looked at it. Its almost face rippled. It stood and with a fast, decisive motion crushed the machine. It shattered like crab shell. A thin, metallic scent lifted, then vanished into the room's breath. Mill swayed. Ree caught its elbow. They stood together for a moment and learned each other's weight. "Thank you," Mill said, not written, spoken. The word came out shaped like the inside of a bell. "You're welcome," Leon replied, "but it wasn't only for you. When we take a collar off one person, we make it easier to take collars off the next 10. Ree looked away. She swallowed. The bean in her pocket pressed into her heart. What came after rescue surprised her because it was not the end. It was the middle. The island had gathered many, people from the mountain settlements, people from ships that had fallen and not broken completely, people who had lived in bunkers too long, people who had been gardens once standing up and had decided to be people again because it seemed kinder. They had 100 stories and one hunger. The hunger was this, to belong to a future. Ararat drifted toward the Lagrange corridor where the invisible road hung between Earth and Moon. They weren't alone. Ree saw other islands on the horizon sometimes, far off, their undersides gilded by sun, their waterfalls threading new rivers into old sky. She learned that Ararat was one of the smaller islands, a skiff following the wakes of bigger ships that had been cities even before the war taught quiet. She learned that the islands had learned to speak softly enough the choir didn't always hear them. She learned that the choir had ears in the ground and machines that loved hunger and did not remember the hands that had made them. Ree learned the island's ways. She slept when the island did, in a bed that felt grown under her and warmed where her knees had once been cold. She ate from bowls that changed shape to fit her hands. She learned to walk on bridges that knew her feet. She found the other children who had come up from forests and ruins and railyard camps and taught them her snare knots, and they taught her how to ask the soup to be less shy and the lights to be kinder to headaches. She took off her mother's sleeve braid and washed it gently and tied it back with a length of new cloth that felt like mourning. She kept the old cloth. She pressed it to her face at night and cried into it softly so the room would not ask her if she needed company. Sometimes she said out loud, "Mama, I am going to the moon road." The room never told her she was foolish. She worked. The islands were not governments. They were big bodies moving through bigger bodies, and like all bodies they needed organs. Rejoin the catchers. Catchers stood on the undersides of platforms with harnesses bleeding from their belts and watched for things that fell from the sky. Not rocks. Not meteors, people. Sometimes it was a handful. Sometimes it was a crowd clutching old ropes tied to old railings, praying to old gods who had not asked to be prayed to in decades. Catchers guided them into the shimmers and shaped the gravity around them with gestures the platforms understood. Sometimes they failed, and the failing was a weight you wore like a wet coat for days. You never spoke about it. It was loud enough inside already. Mill learned too. Mill had fingers that danced, and the Webb's team loved that. Mill sat in a room of sighing wires and coaxed signals out of noise. Mill whispered to the sky, and the sky whispered back. The choir hummed out in regions where the islands did not go, and Mill wrote new maps of where quiet was safe. Mill slept sitting up sometimes with its head bent in a way that hurt Ree to see, and Ree would drape a blanket over Mill's shoulders and sit with her back to Mill's back and doze. They did not speak as much as friends speak in stories. They built. They stood watch. They ate. They slept. When they did talk, it was brief, impactful, the way Ree liked. "Did you have a word for home?" Ree asked one night, watching a cluster of stars draw near and then peel away as the island shifted. Mill considered. "We had a word for the place where our weight had meaning," it said. "We had a word for the place that was shaped by our steps. We had fewer words than you for belonging. You have so many words for being together. It is a good weakness." Ree smiled. "It is not a weakness." "Everything that can break," Mill said, and then paused. "I am trying to say it in your language. Everything that can break can be mended, but it is still possible to break. This is not bad. Ree leaned her head on Mill's shoulder. Sometimes I have so many words, they clatter. I put them in a jar and shake them until they stop yelling at me. Then I open the jar slowly. Mill laughed, a sound like glass settling. You are good at jars. The islands drew closer to the corridor where the moon hung like a pearl behind thin cloud. The war had been busy there. Silent ships passed sometimes at the edge of vision, scars on the sky, their surfaces etched with nets that caught light and changed it into angles that did not exist before. Ree had nightmares of those ships tasting the island's motion and swinging their heads around like wolves. She woke with her fists clenched and her bed making little soothing hums. She unclenched her hands and told herself, "It is okay. It is okay to be afraid. Courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is walking anyway." She walked. They needed to pass a point where the sky got thin, too thin for the smaller islands. The bigger ones could push across, dragging the small like children holding on to parents who had eaten well. But the bigger ones were far and busy. They were lifting entire districts from cities that had sat on ground that did not want them anymore. Ararat had two choices: wait and risk being nitpicked by the choir's little knives, or try to cross the thin place on its own. Leon said, "We cross." Kelu said, "We cross and sing while we cross and hope the choir is hungry somewhere else." Ree said, "We cross fast." Mill said nothing for a long breath. "Then we cross and give them a decoy." "How?" Ree asked. Mill closed its eyes, then opened them. "With my collar's corpse. The thing on my chest learned my body's grammar. It learned my breath. It learned how to count me. We can give it a false count. We can teach it a lie. It will tell the choir an old story. That story will taste true enough to be a meal. They will eat it. We will pass." Ree felt something like nausea rise, but it wasn't nausea. It was a kind of fierce tenderness rising from her stomach, pressing into her throat. "Will it work?" Mill shrugged. "Lies work better when they are kind to the truth." Leon looked at Kelu. Kelu looked at the ceiling as if the island had left notes there. The island breathed. The room held its breath because rooms learn from the people in them. "We try," Leon said. They did. They took the collar's core, still humming like a dead thing that doesn't know it is dead yet, and put it in a cradle of wires. Mill leaned over it and whispered. Ree watched the patterns on the display beyond the cradle bloom and bloom again. Kelu tapped air and the island reached slender fingers into the signal and plucked it like a string until the notes fell just so. Ree asked, "What story are we telling?" Mill said, "We are telling them that we are small and slow and tired. We are telling them that we will take a long time to cross. We are telling them that their mouths should water but their feet need not run." "Is that kind?" Ree asked. "It is kinder than telling them nothing," Mill said, and there was a sadness in the word that made Ree want to bite the air. "Why be kind?" Ree asked and hated herself for asking it but needed to. Mill's fingers paused midair. "Because we must practice what we want to become," it said quietly. "The choir is made of the war's long hunger. We are trying to be its end. We cannot become hunger's echo on the way." Ree looked down at her fists, she uncurling them slowly, flexed. Let them be hands again. The crossing day came. It smelled like rain and hot metal and old fear. The island gathered itself. The waterfall narrowed. The shimmers tightened into ropes you could not see. The platforms extruded grips like tendons. The rooms deepened. The children were strapped gently to cots that would not care if you kicked. The elders hummed songs that had learned to dodge the choir's ears. The catchers put on harnesses. Ree's harness creaked, and the creak was a comforting sound. The thin place was visible and not. The sky went pale as bone and then too transparent. The ground fell away into haze like breath on glass. The stars came out in the day, small and patient. Between them something moved that made the hairs on Ree's arm stand up. It was not a ship. It was not a cloud. It was a shape like geometry given too much to drink. She looked away and swallowed until her ears popped. "We're crossing." Kelu said into the general air, and the island pressed its whole body forward in a single, soft shudder. Ree stood on the underside and watched the ground slide away in a way ground is not supposed to do. She watched a village shrink and a river turn into a glitter line. She watched a piece of cloud go through her like a sigh. She shook. Mill's voice came through the harness connection, soft, steady. "Ree, here," she said. "Listen." She listened. At first she heard only the island's breath, the hum of the web room, Kelu's voice, children, old songs. Then, faint under everything, she heard the collar's corpse telling its lie. It told it well. It said, "We are small, we are slow, we are tired, we are delicious and not going anywhere soon." At the edge of her hearing, something rustled. It was a feathered noise. It was a cloak turning. It was the choir turning its head toward dinner. Again, Mill said, "Listen to us." Ree listened. "We are many," breathed the island. "We are holding on. We are a bridge made of bodies. We are not easy bread. We are not worth the work you will have to do. Your hunger will be briefly pleased, and then the work will come and you will regret." The rustle shifted. It turned. It held away. It did not vanish. The thin place squeezed them like a hand. The pressure made Ree's eyes water. The island groaned like whales. The shimmers sparked. A bolt of knot light slid along the island's belly and tried to eat a corner. The corner hardened and bled. Leon said something Ree did not understand that made the corner change color and taste different, and the knot light spit it out. Somewhere a child began to cry, and the room itself rocked them, and the crying softened to little gasps. Kelu sang, a tune without notes that braided itself around the hum of the collar's lie and made it rounder, kinder. A shadow loomed. "Choir," Mill said, and the word made Ree's back go cold. Ree braced. She leaned into her harness and bared her teeth, and maybe that was silly, but it made her feel like her skin was a decision. She held onto a grip that felt like a hand holding back. The shadow hovered near the island's flank. It did not touch. It did not need to. It had learned to sing at distances. The air turned to iron. The island bent. The harnesses went tight. A voice spoke, not on channels, not in bones, not through the rooms. It spoke in the way the island's roots talked to the wind. "Hungry," it said without words. "We know," the island answered, and Ree heard it because she was pressed so close to the place where the island's blood ran. "We are hungry too. We will not feed you." Ree did not know islands could be so polite. The shadow drew closer. The sky went thinner. A soundless chord thrummed. It was a chord tuned to bend ships into smaller shapes. It ate corners of things. It licked at edges. Ree tasted copper. Her eyes refused to stay in focus. She blinked until they obeyed her. Mill's breath came in her ear. "I am going to do something unkind," it said. Ree's heart jumped. "Don't," she said, and the word came out as a plea that embarrassed her. "Don't become them." Mill made a sound like an apology. "We cannot always be what we are practicing," it said. "We can practice again later." "Mill," Ree said, but there was no time in the word. The shadow folded around the island as if about to remember how to be teeth. The collar's lie quavered. It was a beautiful lie. It was not enough. Mill stood on the underside of the island. It did something to the harness that held it. The harness whispered permission and changed shape. Ree lunged. Her fingers brushed Mill's wrist. They did not catch. Mill stepped into space. It fell. It did not fall like bodies fall. The shimmers took it and turned, falling into motion. It flowed toward the shadow like silk poured over a blade. "Mill!" Ree screamed, and the name hit the island's skin and bounced. Mill held the destroyed collar's core in both hands. The core pulsed like a dead star trying to remember the trick. Mill whispered to it in the language of the map room, in the grammar of machines that had learned to be hungry and could be coaxed into being foolish for a breath. Then Mill did something Ree had not expected from an alien who had been careful with kindness. Mill lied to the choir, and not the lie they had planned, kind and round and almost true. Mill turned the collar's dead voice sharp and bright and sang, "We are here, we are many, we are slow, we are tired, we are delicious. We are your makers." The shadow flinched. It flinched because hunger's oldest story is the story of obeying the hand that made it. It flinched because inside its thorny shape was a crawling memory of commands given in the dark. It flinched because the war had written orders into its bones. It turned its head. It tried to know whether to bow or bite. Mill threw the core into the shadow's heart. Light made no sound, but the island did. The island gasped. The core exploded like a seed finally finding soil. It didn't burn. It didn't flash. It unstuck. It turned the part of the sky that touched it into a field where the choir's voice could not find itself. For a breath, the choir's oldest order, be hunger, was drowned out by a different one, wait. The region around the shadow rippled. The choir's cloak frayed. The island ran, recrowded the rail and reached both hands into the shimmers. Mill, she said, Mill. She felt fingers, not her fingers, long, smooth. Mill's hand caught hers and held like the last rung of the last ladder. Re-pulled. The island pulled. The shadow flailed, its geometry slipping on a field that no longer knew how to be hungry in the ways it remembered. The thin place thickened. The sky stopped trying to be a mouth. Ree snarled through her teeth and dragged her friend in. They sprawled together on the island's underside, breath sawing. Ree realized she had cut her palms on something and didn't remember doing it. Blood slicked the grip. She wiped it on her shirt and laughed in a sound that was half sob. You lied, she said, and she wanted to hug Mill and hit Mill and sit very still all at once. Mill's almost face was pale. It was a color Ree had never seen a face be. It turned toward her and tried a smile. It was a bad smile. It was all teeth. I lied like a human, it said, and its voice was dry and shaking. I will practice kindness again tomorrow. Ree punched Mill's shoulder in the kind of way that says I love you, and if you do that again, I will tie you to the bed with my shoelaces. Mill laughed and didn't pretend it didn't hurt. Ararat burst out of the thin place like a whale rising from the sea. The sky deepened from pale to a darker blue that whispered of black. The moon hung above like a thought. The shadow stuttered and then drifted away as if embarrassed. The caller's voice died in Ree's ear with a final blink, and she did not mourn it. They had crossed. The Lagrange corridor was not a road. It was a place where roads wanted to be. Islands gathered in it like ships in a harbor before weather. They were big and small and ragged and sleek. Some had grown gardens on their tops. Some had towers that had been offices once and were now beehives. Many had cords stretching from their bellies into nothingness. Those cords went up to ships that could live where air was a suggestion. Ree stood on a high balcony and watched the islands arrive. She saw people on their undersides, harnessed like her, waving. She waved back and wondered how far signals could go when they rode on arms. Leon joined her, hair tied back with a strip of purple fabric. You did well, she said, both of you. Ree shrugged. Compliments felt heavy, you had to hold them carefully. Leon leaned on the railing with her. Do you know the old name for the Lagrange points? She asked. On the ship nets. Ree shook her head. Islands of stability, Leon said softly. Places where a thing can float and the river won't tear it away. We need such places. The war turned the whole sky into a current. We've been swimming too long. Ree watched the moon. It looked close enough to touch and too far to hold. The islands hummed. The war did not speak here, not loudly. What happens now? Ree asked. To the ground, to the forests. Leon's mouth tightened, then loosened. We don't abandon ground, she said. We lift who we can. We return the rest their river. The war will end. Even hunger gets tired. But between now and then there is work. Ree nodded. I like work. Leon smiled a tired smile that knew what liking work meant when work was holding the world together with your hands. Good, she said. We need an anchor team. You have hands like rope. Ree looked at her palms. They had new scars already. She flexed her fingers and felt the island's breath move through the metal. No, not metal, whatever it was that turned panic into kindness. I'll go, she said, and she did. They anchored, they caught, they lied and told truths. They taught the ground how to climb without ladders when no ladders could be found. They sang kinds of songs the choir couldn't hear. They ate things that grew in air. They made new jars and threw them into new beams and watched the sky answer. Sometimes, in the quiet hours when the island slept and its platforms rested and its rooms exhaled like big animals dreaming of bigger animals, Ree took the old cloth that had tied her hair and sat with it. She unfolded it and folded it again and said, "Mama, I am building ladders." In her mind, her mother smiled and said, "Of course you are. You have always been good at turning hard things into steps." Ree went back to work. The war did not end that day. The war was made of too many days and kept secret in too many rooms. But on that day, in that blue slice of sky, the war received an answer it had not expected from a child and an alien and an island that knew how to say welcome. The choir learned they could not hear everything. The machines learned some collars could be turned into seeds. The ground learned the sky could be convinced to lean down and hold hands. The children learned they could be architects of a world that fit the shape of their hunger without becoming it. Years later, when Ree's hair had threads of white in it that the island lights loved to kiss, when the catchers told stories to new recruits, and their hands moved as much as their mouths, they told a story about a day when a jar caught a beam, and a piece of dead machine woke a small god and an alien lied for love. They did not tell that the girl had been afraid, because the children did not need to hear that to be brave, or maybe they did. When Leon told it, she paused at the right place and looked at the children and said, "Everyone is afraid. Courage is walking anyway." Ree liked that version best. One evening, as the corridor fell into a quiet that tasted like cool tea, Mill found Ree on the balcony where the moon looks like a listener. They stood side by side for a long time, the way people who have shared a thin place do. They did not fill the air with words. The island did that for them, humming a note of contentment that made Ree's bones settle. "Do you regret?" Mill asked finally. "Regret what?" Ree said. "Leaving the forest," Mill said. "Leaving your shape there." Ree thought about the pool of green water that smelled like iron, about the fallen log that had hidden her while a skimmer's eye searched, hungry, about Aggie's garden and the bin of beans and the little skull, about the time the animal with moon eyes had stepped on a machine and turned it into pieces, and the way its roar had not made any sound at all, and how that had felt a lot like prayer. "I carry it," Ree said. "All of it. It makes my pockets heavy. It keeps me from floating away." Mill nodded. "We carry many." "Do you regret lying?" Ree asked. She didn't ask because she wanted to judge Mill. She asked because the question sat in her mouth and had to be spat out or swallowed, and she had learned that spitting was kinder. Mill's almost face changed in small ways. "I regret the part of the lie that tasted like my maker's," it said quietly. "I regret that the choir listened because of that taste, but I do not regret saving you. I do not regret saving the island. I will practice kindness again tomorrow." Ree took Mill's hand. It was still too smooth. It was still warm. "Tomorrow," she said, "and the day after, and the day after." They stood like that until the moon set its cheek on the horizon and closed its eye, and the islands drifted like whales, and the forest below dreamed of rivers that remembered their names. And when the war finally ended, and it did, like a loud illness fading into a cough and then into a scar, you could trace the map of how it ended back through 1,000 small kindnesses, and a handful of necessary lies, and 100,000 hands gripping rails and harnesses, and the undersides of platforms and each other. You could trace it back to a girl alone in a forest who asked a broken beacon to sing, and a sky that learned to listen again. The forest did not forget her. It grew new paths where her feet had learned to be silent. It lifted leaves to the islands when they passed low and shook water at them like blessings. The islands did not forget her. In their guts, ladders grew like vines, and the ladders made no sound, and the silence was no longer hunger. If you stood in the Lagrange corridor and listened very carefully, you could hear a hum that wasn't machines. It was the weight of many lives balancing on the edge of one another like stones in a river, all leaning just enough and not more. That is how bridges are built. That is how wars end. And most nights before she slept, Ree walked the long passage on the island's underside where the air smelled like mint and rain and old lightning, and she ran her fingers along the place where the shimmer first took her hand. She whispered, "Thank you." The island did not answer. It did not need to. It held her weight and did not let her fall. As the years unfolded, as Ararat became less a ship and more a town, as children were born who did not know the taste of dirt so bitter it made their mouths ache, as the choir's shadow became one more weather to watch for and not a god to fear, Ree kept a jar on her shelf. It was small and glass and cracked around the lip. Once on a day when a storm spread pearl light across the sky and the island breathed like a sleeping lion, a young trainee pointed to the jar and asked, "What is that for?" Ree smiled. "That," she said, "is for catching answers." The trainee didn't understand. That was all right. They would. On the day the islands returned to the ground to plant new forests where old gardens had burned, Ree stood in a field of new green things and pressed her toes into soil that surprised her with its softness. Mill stood beside her and looked up at Ararat and down at the furrows and then up again, like someone not ready to pick one home over the other. They didn't have to. "You can do both," Ree said, and smiled when Mill looked at her with that quick wonder it used to have when it learned a new human thing. "You can belong to the road and to the house. Humans do it all the time." Mill laughed. "We will practice." They did. They planted a tree that grew leaves shaped like hands. They watered it with a jar that had once caught a piece of the sky. The War of Silent Stars wrote its last line in a handwriting nobody liked. And then the page turned, and the next page belonged to the ones who had endured. Ree grew old in the way that means you collected enough mornings that your pockets sagged. And sometimes you had to sit down and take them all out and look at them and put most back and keep one to hold in your mouth like a candy, sweet and painful and yours. When she died, because everyone does, the island did not make a sound. Kelu wrapped her in a cloth that felt like mourning and handed her to the forest. Mill sat at the edge of the grave that wasn't a grave but a seed in the shape of a cave, and it said in a voice that had learned to be gentle, "We will practice kindness again tomorrow." The tree with hand leaves grew tall. Children hung jars in its branches. When the wind blew, the jars sang. And that is the story of a girl alone surviving in a forest who climbed the sky to the floating islands and made the silence less hungry. And that day, the galaxy learned humanity doesn't conquer, it endures. Headphone, if you enjoyed this story, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more epic HFY sci-fi tales. Until next time, stay human, stay unbroken.